Welcome to Routing for Success, the show where we interview today's top logistics professionals, giving them a platform to share their stories and best practices. Today, we're bringing back Dean Maciuba of Crossroads Parcel Consulting to tell us about the UPS Teamsters deal, which was ratified by its union membership late last month. This is the third time we've had Dean on the Routing for Success podcast. He previously joined us in episode number 15 to talk about the potential of a UPS Teamsters strike, and in episode 9 to tell us about FedEx Ground, Express, and Freight merging into one network. In this episode, Dean walks us through the details of the UPS Teamsters deal and how other carriers like FedEx Ground might be impacted. I'm pleased to bring you Dean Maciuba. All right, we are back with Mr. Dean Maciuba. Dean, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the last time that you and I spoke, it was about the potential of a UPS strike. They were negotiating with the Teamsters. The Teamsters were threatening to go on strike. And, we were speculating about the outcome and some of the things that were important to both of those parties, UPS and the Teamsters. And at the end of that interview, Dean, I asked you a question. And the question was, what do you think the chances are of a strike actually occurring? And the answer that you had given was 80% chance against a strike occurring. So you thought there was an 80% chance that they would figure things out and that a strike wouldn't need to end up happening. Dean, I got to tell you, in the comment section of that video, if you're watching this, you can go check it out on our YouTube channel. The comment section, you were getting roasted. I mean, people were not happy with that answer at all. But I think it was because people misunderstood fundamentally what you were talking about. I think the point that you were trying to make is not that the Teamsters didn't have it in them to strike. I think they did have it in them to strike. The point that you were making was that they would probably end up arriving at a deal, and a strike just wouldn't be necessary. But it's still fun to go back and read those comments. People were not happy with that conclusion. Here we are at the end of August, and Dean, you were right. They reached a deal. It's been ratified by the rank and file, and the chances of a strike, it's not happening. So, Dean, I wanted to bring you back to walk us through what were the terms of the deal that they came to. Give us the bullet points, the summary. What were some of the compromises made on both sides? And then we'll get into just your overall impression, and then hopefully some of the second order effects on companies like FedEx Ground, Amazon, and anything else that's relevant. But Dean, why don't you start off just by walking us through what was the deal that they came to?
Well, again, Ryan, thanks for having me. It did get a little tight at the end there. I was almost second guessing myself that last week before they scheduled, because there was a lot of chatter between the two parties, and it's typical in that type of contract negotiation where it never got nasty, but the degree of rancor was elevated a little bit between the two parties. But what I found was really interesting is UPS totally took the high road through the entire process, and they didn't get nasty at all. Something else that they did that was really interesting is they're very good at praising their employees and telling, this is on via social media, and they're very good at constantly reminding the audience that it's the employees at UPS that are critical to the success of our company. And they stayed with that tune. They took the high road. And it would have been hard for me to do that as an individual because the Teamsters were taking shots at them and making some false claims in some cases and things like that. So in retrospect, what that tells me now is they were going to settle no matter what. And I think the reason why they were going to settle was there was just too much on the line if there was a strike. So at the end there, they realized we're going to have to give them what they want. And they did. I mean, they totally folded their hand. I mean, they gave them everything they want. A quick overview here is on the 25th of July, they agreed to a tentative 5-year contract that calls for a $2.75 an hour wage increase in the first year for full and part-time workers, and then small increases in years 2 through 4, and another bump, not as big, in the 5th year of the contract. So they addressed all of their questions or requests regarding pay increase for, and the two of the big issues were part-timers, and they increased, and part-timers, there are part-time drivers, but when they are talking about part-timers, they're usually talking about the folks that work in their hubs and terminals that sort packages and do the heavy lifting. And they came through with pay increases there. And then that separate lower paid class of driver that they had was critically important. They folded on that early on and then just said, okay, Teamsters, you don't want it. We're going to trash the whole thing. We don't even have to negotiate about keeping parts of that. And so those two pay issues were critically important to the Teamsters union, and UPS gave them what they wanted. And then through that whole process, again, they kept on reminding anybody that was looking at social media that our employees are so critically important to us, and we know that we're going to work this out, and they did. So the question is, was it just going to be too costly to risk a strike? Because they were starting to lose. They were losing measurable business to FedEx and some other carriers. So very late in the game, you saw a small percentage, I'm going to say less than 5% of shippers start moving their business to the other carriers. FedEx was taking new business almost up until the deadline, which is really surprising too. So I think they looked at it and they said, we cannot risk going on strike because it will wreck us for an extended period of time. And that happened back in 97, the last time they had a strike, where they lost a lot of business and it took a long time to get it back. Some other points about it: by the time the contract ends, senior full-time drivers will earn approximately $170,000 a year in wages and benefits. Now, that's a crazy number. And that's a number that has been presented by the Teamsters. People that, first of all, it didn't make sense to me. I mean, they make a lot of money. We know that. I don't know how they calculated that number. Maybe the number's not that big, but they're making a lot of money. And they're going to make a lot more. But I don't know if it equates to $170,000 a year now in wages and benefits. Part-time and full-time workers will get $750 more in hourly wages over the life of the contract. Existing part-time workers will have their wages raised to no less than $21 an hour immediately, while new part-timers will start at $21 an hour to $23 an hour. The contract ends a two-tier driver wage system, which we talked about, bringing all junior drivers into the seniority status. The Teamsters have long complained that junior drivers were paid less than their senior counterparts for the same work. That was critically important to UPS because a lot of those junior drivers, they were delivering e-commerce routes. And the revenue generated by those packages delivered on those e-commerce routes is not as good per package. And so it made sense that, and that's why UPS went after this second tier of driver 5 years ago. They needed a lower cost driver to deliver those packages, those ugly residential delivery packages. Again, they just said, okay, guys, it's gone. You don't want it. We're not going to, we're going to make it go away. So they just did not want to disrupt what was, in fact, a pretty good deal at UPS for the customer, for UPS, because up until this last quarter, UPS has been killing it. Now, UPS is also starting to feel the effects of a slowing economy. I mean, all of transportation is generally down, but they've been relatively strong going back, 3, 4, 5 years, and even before the economy started tanking a little bit. So there was too much to risk for them to even consider a strike. The contract creates 7,500 new full-time Teamsters jobs by combining part-time hours into full-time. It also mandates that 22,500 open jobs be filled. Drivers will no longer be forced to work overtime on their scheduled off days. Something else that UPS constantly reiterated was flexibility. And they needed to be able to schedule, they needed some flexibility to go ahead and use drivers as they saw fit so they could pick up and deliver packages in the most efficient or cost efficient way possible. And the Teamsters, I'm not saying they caved on that, but they didn't impose many new restrictions or any new restrictions on how they can. I'm not going to say they didn't impose any, but they didn't crush UPS in terms of you're going to have to come to us when it comes to, and then we'll tell you how you're going to use your people. That wasn't going to work. UPS needed that autonomy to run their business as they see fit. They still have that. Obviously, there's some things they can't do because of the terms of the agreement, but UPS retained the flexibility to use their people for the most part as they see fit. Now, there are some scheduling things that they changed that make it better for the Teamsters with regards to overtime and things like that. But I think UPS felt very good in that they retained the flexibility they would need. Some of that flexibility is Sunday delivery, which I did not realize how big a deal that was for UPS. And it's clear to me now that it's a huge deal. And I believe, and I don't have any inside information from anybody at UPS on how important it is, but, UPS runs a 6-day operation in terms of line haul, moving packages once they pick them up, moving them across the country to the destination. And they can deliver a lot of e-commerce shipments on Sunday. And it's so much easier, and they can really fill those trucks, and it's more productive than probably delivering packages on Monday through Friday. So they were able to have or retain autonomy on how they schedule or offering Sunday delivery. I think it's going to be a huge money saver for them. If you stop and think about it, Sunday delivery, people are home on Sunday. So you have fewer stops where you go there and you have to release a shipment, or if it requires a signature that when no one's home. So Sunday delivery was really important for that reason. Traffic. There's no traffic on Sunday for the most part. So it's easier to make deliveries. So, and what they can do is they can just focus on delivering a lot of e-commerce shipments, which then frees them up Monday through Friday to focus with their resources, their labor resources, on really what's important to them. And what's really important to them is the business to business delivery. It's so much more profitable than the e-commerce delivery. And so now by delivering more packages on Sunday, they can throw more resources at supporting the more profitable B2B stop. It might be a later pickup. There's a lot of different things that they can do to enhance the value proposition with their labor for the B2B delivery. And also, B2B has been flat to down a little bit. That's critically important. You didn't hear them talk about that a lot, but it's a big deal. So I think they got what they needed. And, ironically, I was approached by a UPS vice president and president to give them my opinion on the way things were going. And during that call that I had with these two individuals, it was clear to me that they were not worried. And I didn't pick up on it at the time because this was obviously before the settlement. They really weren't worried about not reaching a settlement and going on strike. So I think that was their strategy all along. They were not going to permit a strike. Now, do they believe that they can just raise the rates as needed to cover the added labor expense? Sure, I think that's the case. FedEx just announced this week their general rate increase for 24, and it wasn't a terribly large general rate increase. And does that tell you that FedEx sees this as an opportunity to maybe compete with UPS on price, mostly on the ground side, because they now know that UPS has significantly higher labor costs and is more tied necessarily to a rate increase to drive profits than FedEx. Also, with FedEx in their cost reduction mode, taking $6 billion worth of annualized costs out of their networks, there's another example where, their costs are going down significantly. UPS's are going up significantly. Is this an opportunity for FedEx to compete more aggressively on price, but do it affordably or do it profitably? That may be the case. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of rate increase UPS takes for the general rate increase, which they'll announce probably in the next 1 or 2 months.
Dean, there's a few points that you went over that I'd like to go back to and revisit. First of all, this number of $170,000 as kind of the upper ceiling of what some of their full-time senior drivers will be making. And when I think when a lot of people see that, they think, oh my gosh, that's a ton of money hitting these drivers' bank accounts. I'm going to quit my job and go become a UPS driver. It's not quite that clear. And you had mentioned that you're not exactly sure how they arrived at that, but could you just give us a quick, what are the bullet points of what are some things that might actually go into that number? Is it $170,000 hitting the bank accounts of these drivers?
So a lot of that is benefits. I think and I always thought the benefits package was a better deal than the hourly rate package for the UPS driver. They don't pay towards healthcare. It's free. I mean, where do you see that in business today? You don't. So that's baked into it. The fact that UPS is paying for their health care to include, I believe, no deductibles, which is sort of crazy today. So that has a lot to do with it. The Teamsters pension is significant. That's baked into it. What UPS contributes on an annualized basis to the salary of a driver. So just between the healthcare and the pension, that's a big chunk of that 170. I think what's an interesting number that I'm seeing, which is a real number, is the topped out UPS driver is going to be making $49 an hour at the end of all of this. And that's a lot of money. I mean, we know what, on the FedEx Ground side, what the ground contractors can generally afford to pay their drivers, right? And it's probably about half of what UPS is paying their drivers. That is a big deal. Even though the benefits and the pension and the other things that UPS offers, tuition reimbursement, things like that, that's important. You can't disregard a $49 an hour hourly rate. The other question is this: UPS has never been easy to work for. I mean, it's ugly. Let's face it. The business is difficult. It's physically demanding. Whether you work for FedEx or UPS or a regional carrier or an on-demand carrier. So it's a difficult business to work in, but UPS manages employees more tightly than any other carrier. Nobody is standing around with their hands in their pockets at UPS. So in return for this fantastic compensation, UPS is going to manage the heck out of these guys. They always have. And I would have never dreamed that they could ramp the pressure up. I think they're going to ramp the pressure up. They're going to have to, because they have to push back a little bit on all this additional labor cost.
$49 an hour. Yeah, and you're right, Dean. I think that from everything that I hear from FedEx Ground contractors as to what they're able to pay their drivers, it's about half. Now, of course, it varies depending on exactly where they are in the country and some other things too. But also a lot of FedEx Ground contractors don't give their drivers benefits. There is no 401k, no pension, no health insurance. So that total figure of 170,000 is relevant to some degree because drivers at other companies aren't getting those benefits that they're getting at UPS.
Ryan, one thing I hear from talking to the ISPs, we call them contractors, ISPs, whatever we're calling them. And I think they're being truthful. I think most of them would provide healthcare if FedEx compensated them enough for making pickups and deliveries and operating in those territories. So I do believe that most of those contractors would provide healthcare coverage if there was room for it. Also, everything that I'm seeing is these contractors that manage those routes, that own the territories, they're not making as much today as they were 5 or 10 years ago. They're under a lot of pressure. You know that. You deal with them actually more than I do. So I think they do a good job, the FedEx Ground contractor. I think the ISPs would like to pay their employees more. And I just don't think it's in the cards right now unless FedEx decides to modify that model and more specifically, how they compensate those drivers. And one thing I'm seeing is I'm thinking FedEx is starting to get that. And I also think FedEx may take a more hands-on approach to supporting contractors moving forward in different ways where they never wanted to support them because they were concerned that might be perceived more as an employee relationship if we support these guys in what they do. And I think they were, because, as we both know, FedEx has paid up to almost $750 million in employee classification lawsuits. So I'd be interested in your opinion on this, but, I wouldn't be surprised to see FedEx step up and become more involved in supporting the ground contractor. What do you think?
Well, they are. So we just got back a few weeks ago from the FedEx Forward Service Provider Summer Summit. It was a corporate event, so you can only go there if you're a contractor. We were able to go as an exhibitor, and there was an approval process for that. And FedEx was explicitly talking to the service providers along the lines of, in the past, we've basically just allowed you to do whatever you want, and you can do whatever you want when it comes to who you buy your trucks from, who you lease them from, who you get your fuel card with, all of the different products and services that you need to run a FedEx Ground contractor business. You can get those services from wherever you want for the most part. We've never flexed our muscles as FedEx Ground. But the messaging that they had at that event, Dean, was that they're shifting course on that. I heard that one of the people said something along the lines of, you are a fleet of 70,000 trucks. 70,000 trucks. That's what the FedEx Ground fleet is, but you get treated like a 10-truck fleet or a 20-truck fleet. You should get treated and priced as if you're a 70,000 truck fleet. And so FedEx is going to become more involved in those conversations and those relationships with vendors. And they're already doing that. So I don't know, because you talk about the lawsuits. Yeah, there have been, back when they had single truck operators, man with a van sort of deal at FedEx, there were lawsuits where they came together and said, look, this is not, I'm not a business owner. I'm an employee. And FedEx is paid out time and time again. So I don't know what their plan is to mitigate that risk while also getting involved in these vendor relationships. And it's to be determined exactly what that will look like. For people like me, obviously, so this podcast, Routing for Success, is brought to you by a truck leasing and finance company, AP Equipment Financing. That's where I work. I've worked here for 12 years. So for me, I'm like, hey, how do I get a seat at that table? If there's a conversation to be had there, I want to be a part of that conversation because we're deeply involved in this space. And it's still to be determined exactly what that will look like. But no, Dean, you're right. They're coming to the table now, and they're going to be negotiating. It seems like they're going to be negotiating on contractors' behalf.
One of the things, especially last year when we went through that very contentious period where, the ground contractors were getting very vocal about the conditions and trying to leverage or pressure FedEx. And one thing that just never added up for me was the ground contractor relationship is the most important contractor relationship for the entire corporation. And I found it hard to believe that last summer it degraded to the point where it got, where there was so much open animosity, not necessarily between the two, but definitely being exhibited by the ground contractors against FedEx for a number of reasons. And it never made sense to me that they didn't try and fix that because it was so important. And we were talking about UPS just 20 minutes ago and how their whole focus right now is really telling their employees how great they are and how important they are to the success of the company. So, they need to look at what UPS is doing in terms of how they're managing that relationship, because who does the customer see? The driver at the time of pickup and delivery. And that relationship is so important. And I hope FedEx gets it, that whatever's broken, I'm not expert in that area. I know about it. I talk to contractors, things like that. But I hope they're getting it, that they have to fix it. And I'm thinking maybe that's starting to happen.
It's starting to happen. I agree 100%. And actually, the FedEx Forward Summit in Orlando, I think, was evidence of that. Because they really, FedEx Ground stopped, holding events. And I think that they lost the influence, which kind of allowed some very loud voices last summer to come up and kind of cause a ruckus. I will say, last summer, everything we were seeing on the news, a lot of that was a relatively small group of contractors who were making a lot of noise. If you actually took the time to talk to a wide variety of contractors to get their opinion on what's going on, sure, there were some who said, no, this is absolutely right. We're not making enough money. It's impossible to cash flow in this business. Some serious changes have got to be made, kind of rah stuff. But there were a lot of other contractors, Dean. In fact, I think there were probably even more in the second group, which were saying, yeah, times are tough, but I'm still making money. And I'm definitely not going to be parking my trucks for peak season and protest. That's out of the question. But they're just not as noisy, so you don't hear about it quite as much. But bringing it back to the communication aspect, there was a FedEx contractor, Dean, who I was talking with about trying to get him to come onto the podcast. And I won't mention his name, but I spoke with him before the Orlando Summit, and he said, Ryan, look, I can't come onto the podcast right now. I'm just in too negative of a headspace. I just moved into a new station. I expanded into a new terminal, and it is not going well. There's this wrong and that wrong, and I'm just not getting through to the terminal management. I don't feel like they're on my side, and I don't want to get onto the podcast and spout a bunch of negativity. That's not what your podcast is about. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. I spoke with the same contractor on the last day of the FedEx Forward Summit in Orlando, and he said, Ryan, let's schedule that podcast, man. I am feeling good. And I said, well, why? It seems like a complete 180 from just a few days ago when I spoke with you. And he said the big difference maker for him, Dean, was that he was able to show up in person to this event, and he had access to the corporate level of FedEx Ground. And he was able to talk to various departments and air some of the problems he was having. And I guess we'll see if they're actually bringing solutions to the table for this particular guy who I'm talking about. But he was left feeling like he was heard. Like he said, a lot of the things where my terminal management just didn't seem to care or didn't seem to listen, these corporate employees who I was able to talk with face to face, it seems like they care. And I'm leaving this event feeling like I may be able to actually make some progress here. And it was a total 180 compared to how he was before. So I think FedEx is starting to figure it out, and I think that they're making improvements there.
And I think the one other major point that makes all this coalesce, or it helps us to understand why it's happening, is ground contractor network, or whatever it's called, is going away. FedEx Ground is going to be the entity that delivers and picks up all packages. And it's happening. And it's happening at where they're merging the smaller express stations normally into a ground terminal. And that's meaning more packages for those ground contractors. More packages should mean improved scale, improved productivity, and improved profitability. Also, what we don't know is as they start giving them more of the express packages to deliver, the legacy ground model, as they start giving them more packages and they start having them delivering priority packages that yield twice as much in revenue as a ground shipment, does FedEx Express pay them more to deliver that premium package? It makes a lot of sense to me that they are going to pay them more. Obviously, that's a huge opportunity. I have no inside information. I have no idea how FedEx is going to continue to change compensation as they give ground more express packages. But to me, it makes all the sense in the world that it is an opportunity for the ground contractors to make more money. Now, do they have to raise the bar and potentially provide a higher level of service for those express deliveries than the ground delivery? Yes, of course they do. I don't think it's beyond them. I think FedEx is putting together programs, you're probably aware of them, right? Where they're trying to improve or measure performance by a contractor because they need the contractors to raise the bar to maintain service on those express shipments that will be moving from the express employee model to ground. I still think it's a huge opportunity, and I hope FedEx management doesn't screw it up. I really don't. I mean, they've got to figure out a way to make it better. And it sounds like, based on your experience, because you're closer to the ground contractors than I am, they're trying to do that.
They're trying to do that. Dean, you were talking about compensation. Let's talk again about this $170,000 figure from UPS. What is your take on how the rest of the industry is going to respond just to that? I mean, UPS has these drivers making a lot of money. What do all of their competitors do with that information?
They can't respond to it. Really, UPS is the unicorn out there, right? I mean, they're totally unique. If you look at the on-demand segment that provides same-day delivery or next-day delivery from forward stocking fulfillment centers, which is growing very quickly and a threat to FedEx and UPS, they're not in a position to significantly pay their drivers more. FedEx Ground may be in a position to do that. We don't know by how much. The regional carriers, their compensation is probably a little bit below what the FedEx Ground driver is generally paid out there. So it does provide UPS a huge advantage in terms of retention and hiring the cream of the crop. And that is an advantage. There's no question, because you pay people more, you get better qualified people that you train them. UPS invests significantly more in training than anybody else. You put that whole package together, and in general, you have a carrier, UPS, that can provide a better service experience for the customer. It's going to be really, really hard. But the flip side to that is this. Does it really matter for a released e-commerce delivery if you don't have that super high level of service that UPS offers? Because in most cases, the consumer isn't coming into contact with the driver. They're not having that experience. So do you need to pay drivers that much to make residential deliveries? No. Is it an advantage for UPS? To a certain extent. I don't know how significant that advantage is, because you don't need, and nobody would ever say this, but it's true, you don't need that higher level of service to release the e-commerce delivery. You just don't need that. So it's almost not necessarily a great advantage there. Where it is an advantage is the B2B delivery, because that's where the recipient is meeting with and talking to on a daily basis the driver for both pickups and deliveries. So from the B2B standpoint, where you need a higher level of service, does it does it mean that UPS has a significant advantage because they're paying their people more and they're probably getting a little bit better service out of them than you would if you're paying someone significantly less and you're another carrier? So that's where the advantage is, in my opinion, on the B2B side of things.
Yeah, I mean, Dean, I can tell you at my company, I'm standing here in an office building. Our UPS driver has an electronic key to our front door. We're not like an office that's open to the public for people to, only people coming in here are people who work here, except for our UPS driver. He has a key card to our front door. So I think you're right. There are some fundamental differences between the two different models, right? And then also the type of driver who gets recruited. I think a lot of people look at that and say, oh my goodness, UPS is paying their drivers $49 an hour, $170,000 is what their senior people make who are full-time. How are these other carriers going to step up their game with respect to compensation? And maybe they do to some degree, but Dean, I feel like it's a different driver. And you see it all the time online, FedEx contractors talking about the differences between UPS, where you're working long hours, you are very tightly managed. And I'll tell you, that UPS guy who I was talking about has a key card for our front door. I've never seen the guy walk ever. He runs. Right. He runs from his truck to our front door and he runs back. And I have to believe that he's doing that at every stop and he's doing that every single day. You hear a lot of FedEx Ground contractors talk about their model. It's a lower barrier to entry to become a driver for a FedEx Ground contractor than it is for UPS or even Express. And the hours are shorter. It's more flexible. They're more willing to make accommodations with respect to things like scheduling. I've spoken with some contractors who are talking about challenges that they experience with Gen Z employees basically wanting to work like a 32-hour work week, and they're making accommodations. I highly doubt that you could, make $49 an hour at UPS and also dictate a 4-day work week. I don't know, maybe you can, but I would be pretty surprised. And it's a generally accepted thing for FedEx Ground contractors that their drivers, it's kind of like the entry-level job, right? And they have very high turnover. Right. And I'm not saying that as like a knock on them or a negative. It's just part of the deal.
You're right.
They don't pay a ton. A lot of the contractors don't give benefits and they have pretty high turnover. So they bring people in, they train them how to deliver packages. And at some point, the drivers either decide they want to go do something else with their time, or they, maybe they move on to a company like Express or UPS with that experience. But it's not a total apples to apples comparison, UPS versus everyone else with respect to the compensation and what the job actually takes delivering the packages.
And something else that works against UPS and is in favor of the lower cost drivers is e-commerce continues to grow faster than the B2B. The residential delivery is growing significantly faster than the B2B delivery. And so, you don't necessarily need to pour $49 an hour into the driver that's releasing a residential delivery. I don't think we know how it's going to all play out. I do believe, though, there is a distinct possibility, though, that UPS is doing a great job selling this right now. They could absolutely struggle when it comes to driving margin based on these new parameters for labor cost. And remember, UPS is a publicly traded company. They don't have a lot of flexibility if things start tanking. And so while everything seems great with UPS right now, it probably is. Everybody's talking proud there. Executive management feels very good about what's going on. They could be facing some serious profit issues if they don't figure out a way to recover this added labor cost. And the biggest challenge is, if they were a poorly run company, they could run it more efficiently. You can't run UPS very much more efficiently than it's already run. There's not a whole lot of space to realize gains because they do such a damn good job already. So while everything looks good for UPS right now, and it looks good for their employees, it is still a huge challenge for them to figure out a way how to make up for that extra labor cost that resulted from this.
Yeah, and just to put into perspective how big of a number that is. I mean, if you think about the business fundamentally, is you have a a truck, usually a step van, driving around, picking up and delivering packages with a driver, and all of the other products and services that go into supporting that. But that's what the work is. So you think about that as a single unit. Dean, it is not uncommon. In fact, I would say it's probably close to the average. I don't know if there's an official statistic on this. Typical FedEx Ground route, one truck delivering packages like that, top line revenue paid to the contractor by FedEx Ground might be something to the tune of like $130,000. So that's the top line revenue. That's where you start, $130,000. Now from that, they have to pay for the truck itself or a truck lease payment, the interest on the loan. They have to pay for their fuel. They have to pay for insurance. They have to pay for preventative maintenance and repair for when that truck just needs to go through its maintenance or it breaks down, tires, everything else that goes into it. They have technology solutions, which they're required to pay for, video event data recording systems that they put into the trucks, route optimization systems. And by the way, and they have to pay the driver and the payroll taxes and everything else. So there's only so many ways you can cut a penny. And you have UPS paying $170,000, and that includes benefits, but that's relevant. $170,000 when a FedEx Ground contractor only gets paid $130,000 or $140,000 total for the route. There's no way that they could afford to pay the drivers anywhere near that. So it's two different models for sure. But I think my point is it illustrates how big of a number that is, and UPS has got to have some tricks up their sleeve, if they're going to be paying that and still hope to be profitable, right?
You would think, right? You hope. Something else too, and this is Dean speculating. UPS has been running away from the ugly, low revenue e-commerce shipment package faster than FedEx Ground has been, or FedEx. And that's because it's a significantly less profitable transaction than the commercial ground or the express shipment. I have to wonder if, UPS has been shrinking, and then they're bragging about it. They're saying smaller but better. And they're running away from the junk business. They're just firing these customers. And that slacked off a little bit in the last year because the economy got soft, and you did see them start going back after some of this lower revenue ground business. But it's remotely possible that UPS once again goes back and says, well, if we're paying our drivers significantly more, and they are, and if this is really generally ugly business, the residential delivery, maybe we just walk away from the worst of that. And yes, we're paying drivers more, but maybe if we walk away from enough of that business, do we have fewer drivers that we're paying more? And then does that benefit us? Because the balance of packages that are remaining are B2B ground and express. And we make so much more on that transaction that it may make sense to run away from more of this ugly e-commerce business if it means we can not have to have, or we can have fewer of these very costly drivers making that delivery. And I don't see UPS necessarily laying people off. I'll guarantee you right now that UPS probably does have people laid off right now because volume went down just before the strike because customers were moving their business. I don't know that UPS would face layoffs, but they can absolutely slow the growth of the business. And if that means they can have fewer highly paid drivers, maybe that makes sense.
Dean, I feel like that's a good place to sign off. Is there anything else that you want to talk about while we're here?
No, I'm glad we were able to catch up. Going to be really interesting with regards to the rate increases, the general rate increases, and see how UPS manages that in relation to all this higher labor costs they have. And they're going to leverage the UPS brand, and they're going to try and get the customer to pay more because they need to make the customer understand from their perspective that it's a better service. And that's key, and that'll determine a lot of UPS's success moving forward. can they get the customer to pay more because UPS service is perceived as the premium service.
Dean, I appreciate you coming back onto the show. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Routing for Success is brought to you by AP Equipment Financing. In today's competitive market, it is essential to acquire the right trucks at a fair price and finance them in a way that makes sense for your business. Leveraging their extensive network of truck and van suppliers, the experts at AP Equipment Financing will help you locate the best deals on step vans, cutaways, panel vans, and more. Deliver them straight to your facility and finance them with low monthly installment options. Click the link in the description or visit apfinancing.com for more information. Routing for Success is an independent production of AP Equipment Financing and is in no way affiliated with or endorsed by FedEx Corporation, FedEx Ground, Amazon, or any other logistics company discussed herein. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Routing for Success.